Hi guys, happy Thursday. Simone from 90s Crime Time here with your weekly 90s crime. Once again, today's crime has not yet been on any social media platform of 90s Crime Time, nor on the podcast. And today's episode, comes from 1999, and it takes place in New York City, specifically Brooklyn, New York. And let's backtrack a little bit to 1990. And in that year, the people of New York City had been seeing the murder rates and the crime rates go down steadily than the previous years. And people felt happier and safer. And they were like, okay, great. New York is back to being a little safe, a little bit safer. There are, of course, still crimes like robberies and murders, but the crime rates have been going down. And one of those people that moved to New York City because New York is obviously a great place in their mind about being safe and things like that was 26-year-old Amy Watkins. Now, Amy Watkins was a 26-year-old, I'm not sure if she was originally from Kansas, but she was a graduate of the University of Kansas, and she moved to New York City to attend Hunter College, and she wanted to further her education in social work to get her master's. So she went to Hunter College, and she was very excited about being in New York. She wrote her parents a lot of letters saying how much she loved New York. And in one specific letter to her father in early 1999, she said she was happy that her neighbors in Brooklyn were diverse. Her neighbors were mostly from the West Indies, and she was saying that New York City people were very friendly to her, and she was happy about what New York City had to offer her, and she was excited about graduating from Hunter College in May of 1999, that year. And she also worked as an intern at a battered women's shelter. Obviously, she wanted to be a social worker, so that her job was to help people. And that's one of the things she loved to do, was work at a battered women's shelter and community center where a lot of kids frequented as well. So she worked with battered women. She also worked with children. She was a very lovable person from what I read about her. And on the night of March 8th, 1999, however, she had left her job at the internship. And she stopped at the grocery store to get some groceries. And around 9:45 that evening, she walked past a restaurant on the way to her house. And two men walked out the restaurant, according to reports, and came up to her and said, "Hey, give me your belongings." And she fought with them, tussled with them, and they were like, "No, we're not going to do this. You're going to just give us your things." And Amy fought back, and she screamed. And when she screamed, one of the men stabbed her in the back with a kitchen knife. And she fell to the ground, and then the two men fled the scene with only $8. An hour later, she was at the hospital. She was taken to the hospital a little bit before that, obviously, but an hour later at the hospital, she died at 10:45 that evening, and she was only 26 years old. And the police had a heavy job because a lot of people in that area knew Amy. They loved Amy. They wanted to know who did this to Amy. And a lot of people attended her wake, including then Mayor Rudy Giuliani of New York City, obviously. And it took them months, the NYPD, to figure out who killed Amy Watkins. And that was until early 2000 when a man was boasting about killing Amy, how the cops never found them, never figured out who killed him, but I was the one who did it. And a tip was led to the police, and they eventually arrested Felix Rodriguez for the murder of Amy Watkins and his accomplice, David Jameson. They were buddies, like lifelong buddies, and they did this to Amy. They boasted about it and were arrested for it. Soon after, a third accomplice, Pierre Antoine, was arrested as an accomplice for Amy's murder. However, there was not a lot of evidence against him, but he was deported back to his home in Haiti. And all three men were in their 20s, and they were standing trial for Amy Watkins' robbery and murder. And the Amy Watkins' parents, surprisingly, begged the judge for leniency. They didn't want them in there forever, but they wanted them to obviously be punished for the death of their daughter. So they were both sentenced to, one was sentenced to 15 years to life, and the other was sentenced to 25 years to life. And the Amy Watkins parents wanted them to be rehabilitated. They wanted them to learn something while in prison. They didn't want them to be in there for life, like I previously mentioned. They worked and formed a bond with the killer's parents. They forgave the killers. They wanted them to make something out of their lives. That was one thing that was striking to me. And Amy's legacy was so strong that she was able to get a scholarship in her name at Hunter College. And that's the case of Amy Watkins. But one thing I will say is that I was kind of surprised that I don't know if it was a busy night in Brooklyn that night, but I do wonder if the neighbors or the neighborhood heard screams from Amy, why didn't anybody help them? Maybe they didn't want to get caught up with the criminal. They didn't want to get caught up in the crime, or they didn't know they were probably scared. I mean, I could say I would be scared, but I would try to call at least maybe the police or something. But like I said, I really don't know, but I do wonder, if they heard screams, could no one help? Or if anybody saw them? Did anybody know who Felix and David were when they committed the crime? But I'll never know. No one will ever know, but we can now say that the Watkins family got justice for their daughter, but they were obviously awesome people to want to form bonds with the killers' families and wanted the killers to make something out of their lives after a while. And that's commendable, and I thought I'd bring that case to you guys, because I'm trying to be a social worker myself, so this case was sort of very interesting to me, that a social worker was murdered in a random way. And there's that. This is the story of Amy Watkins. Please tell me what you think of this case today and 90s Crime Times YouTube channel overall. I'd love to know what you think. Once again, I'm learning about technology and all the things I could do better on this channel, make it livelier, make it better. I did leave a shout out for one of the subscribers, Hector, on last week's episode of 90s Crime Time. So if you guys want to shout out on the show, please leave a comment saying you'd like a shout out. And thank you again for subscribing. Tell your friends and family about 90s Crime Times channel, and I'd love to see you on the next episode. And also, yesterday, there's a new episode that was released on 90s Crime Time, the podcast, called Target. And it's very interesting, and I hope you take a listen and tell me what you think about that one as well. Always follow 90s Crime Time's Instagram page, Facebook, and Twitter to get some updates. And I can't wait to see you on the next episode of 90s Crime Time's YouTube channel. And I will see you guys soon. Bye, guys.